Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so the next program in chapter 2 is circle measurement. Write a program that asks the user to enter the radius of a circle. The program should calculate and display the area and circumference of the circle using pi r squared for the area and 2 pi r for the circumference. Hint, you can either use 3.14159 as the value of pi or add the statement import math to the start of the program and then use math.pi wherever you need the value of pi in the program. Okay, so we're going to ask the user to type in the radius of a circle, and then based on the formulas we're given, pi r squared and 2 pi r, we're going to calculate and display the area and the circumference. So let's start by asking the user to enter the radius of a circle. We can use the input function to do that. So I'm going to call the input function, and I'm going to use that to prompt or ask the user to type in the radius. So the input function takes in an argument, and the argument it takes is the prompt. What is going to be displayed to the user as a question, as a prompt. So I'm going to ask the user, please type in the radius. Okay. So the input function is going to pop up some kind of text box, and it's going to ask the user to type in something. Now, whatever the user types is going to be returned to us as a string. And so when it's being returned to us, back to us, we need a place to store it. So what is being returned is the radius, the user's radius. And so I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it user radius. And I'm going to set it equal to whatever is being returned back to us as a string. So the input function by default always returns a string. Even if the user types in a number, it's going to be returned as a string. But here is the case we're going to be using the radius in some math calculation, and so we need to make sure that whatever is being returned is an actual number, right? Input returns a string, and so we need to convert this, whatever is being returned, to a floating point value, right? Because the radius could be a floating point value. It could be 5.5, it could be 6.2. And so I'm going to call the float function around everything that is being returned back to us as a string. I'm going to wrap the float function around it to make sure it's a float and store it in user radius. Okay, now that we have the user radius, we can use these two formulas, pi r squared and 2 pi r, to calculate the area and circumference respectively. And so let's start with the area. So I'm going to call this area. Area is going to be equal to where is it? So pi r squared, right? We can go ahead and store pi. The program is telling us that we can go ahead and store or use 3.14159 as pi, or we can use an import math to use the pi value in the math library. But let's go ahead and store 3.14159 in a variable. It's actually going to be a constant, a name constant. So right here, actually right above the program, I'm going to create a name constant named pi, and I'm going to set it equal to 3.14159. And so in our area formula, pi times r times squared, sorry, not times squared, pi times r squared, right? It's like radius squared. We can now use the value stored in here. So pi times the user radius is our r squared. And the way you do something raised to the power something in Python is with two asterisks or 2 stars, 2, right? So this is equivalent to pi r squared. It's the r raised to the power 2. If you do this, it's r raised to the power 2. If you change this to 4, it's r raised to the power 4. But here's the case, we want 2 pi r. This, I know this is in the question, it looks like it looks like pi times r times 2. It's really squared. I should really just say like this is squared and not the number 2. Something like that. So it's not the number 2. I know it's confusing. It's squared. All right, so that's our area formula. And then now for our circumference formula, it's going to be 2 pi r. Now this is actually the number 2. So 2 times pi times r. So for our circumference, I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it circumference, and that's going to be equal to 2 times pi, which we have stored in here. So 2 times pi times r, which is our user radius. So now we have our area, we have our circumference. That's all. The program is saying that we should just calculate that and then display them. And so let's call the print function to display them. And we're going to start by saying that the area, this is one argument, and I'm actually going to concatenate it with the value of what's stored in area, like the value of area. So area colon, and I'm going to concatenate it with area, whatever stored in area. But area is going to most likely hold a floating point value, and if you're trying to concatenate a floating point value to a string, you're going to get an error. And so we need to make sure this is also a string. And we can